There are many activities out there that are frowned upon in modern society. Shouting loudly to yourself in public, slapping strangers with a loaf of bread, staring at someone while eating a banana. Those kind of things. But my personal favourite is beating a dead horse.
Of all the classic video game icons from the 8-bit and 16-bit eras, Sonic is the one who fell down a slippery slope in the early 2000s and has occasionally emerged to produce some games of questionable quality. Not to say that all Sonic games are bad, I'd say we're still at a stage where the good outweighs the bad, though I did have a lot of material for this video. Games like Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations prove that the spark hasn't been lost completely, just misplaced. A question of what caused all of this is one that hasn't really been answered yet, and a mystery that Sega themselves are still fumbling around with, but it has left a once beloved franchise grasping around for ideas that might help. Something that I feel does get lost in all of the hatred for some Sonic games is the why behind it. Not just the why was this game made, but also the why is this game so bad, where did we go so wrong? So in the next couple of minutes I'm gonna try and get to the bottom of that. I mean, I won't be able to, but, you know, live and learn and rolling around at some quick speed and something about touching the sun, or I don't know. It's hard to really pinpoint what the primary reason is for Sonic's decline, but I'd say a somewhat decent explanation is that no time is given anymore to stick with an idea. If you keep changing gameplay elements from one game to the next, you're either leaving behind something that works, or squandering the opportunity to fix something that doesn't. There also seems to be this strange tendency to surrender the one thing that Sonic has been really good at for a while now, a sense of speed. The main character is literally named after a speed so fast it affects sound waves. Why wouldn't you use that all the time? For whatever reason, we end up with games like Sonic Labyrinth for the Game Gear.
Maybe slowing Sonic down isn't such a bad thing. You can use it to bring in crowds who don't like absurdly fast gameplay, but you can go too far. I mean, really, when his name is Sonic, you do lose most of his appeal as a mascot if he moves at a snail's pace. You might as well call him Sluggy the Snail.
Oh, Sonic, what's wrong? Why are you so slow? Talk about not playing to your strengths. Sonic Labyrinth, because someone thought that naming a Sonic game after the worst zone from Sonic 1 was a good idea, is a puzzle game, platformer, something, where Sonic has to collect some keys to unlock a door and beat Eggman. Probably. The slow movement can apparently be traced back to Dr. Eggman replacing Sonic's shoes with super slowdown boots that stop Sonic from running fast and jumping. Because that doesn't sound totally contrived or anything, it's a great mechanic, you gotta go slow. But does the slower gameplay work? Well, not really. It's surprisingly easy actually, to the point where there isn't that much challenge and the gameplay ends up being a little too laid back and kind of boring, despite there being a time limit. Even with Sonic being as slow as he is, you do still have a spin dash, which is how you move around with a bit more verve, but it kills everything and makes you invulnerable from hazards during that time. So it effectively turns into a pinball game, but with none of the fun of a pinball game. It's an interesting concept, but the execution is just not exciting enough to keep the player engaged. Maybe if you used a different character and put more effort into some of the pretty dull level design, we might be onto something, but as it is, it's just a really slow Sonic game. That's like taking away Mega Man's arm cannon or Mario's legs. Just stick to what you know you can do. Oh, motion controls, how you tried. Nowadays, games companies are starting to let up, but there were a few years where developers were utterly obsessed with movement controls. I don't know, maybe pressing buttons had lost its charm. And while I'll happily complain about them until someone forcibly stops me, the concept as a whole did have a few shining moments that really did show what the future of gaming could be if people were willing to spend enough time fine-tuning it. Even the Xbox Kinect had a few highlights where everything worked properly. The issue is that for every good game on the system, there was probably one or two that fell miles short. And one of the very worst just so happens to also be a Sonic game. Never really got the novelty of Sonic racing games, to be honest. I know the series' primary commodity is speed, but surely Sonic is faster than any vehicle you put him in. So we arrive at Sonic Freeriders already on a bit of shaky ground, but it doesn't take too long to fall straight through that ground. it perhaps wouldn't come as much of a surprise that FreeRider's biggest problem is its barely functional, mostly broken controls, but what might be an eye-opener is seeing just how much is affected by it. Sure, controlling the Sonic character of your choice is difficult and occasionally impossible, but when your menus are a struggle to navigate, maybe you should rethink your control scheme. Or at least put more effort into it so you don't have to swipe multiple times for something to happen. And it's a shame really, because the game doesn't look half bad. Some of the course designs look pretty decent, but when you're struggling to make turns, it's not the main thing on your mind.
That's what really gets me with motion controls or any type of gimmicky control system. It's how you control your game that makes the headlines rather than the actual content. I've heard that some people have managed to make it work and made the controls respond quite well, but if there are discrepancies, then that is what people will focus on, and that is a bad habit to get into. When considering the darker side of the Sonic franchise, you naturally start gravitating towards the more modern titles, whether it's the tricky switch to 3D that hasn't always been done particularly well, or trying to make Sonic games more cinematic. It's hard to say what the problem is. But it does mean that the classic games are pretty much devoid of any faults. They're not actually.
Well, certainly when you compare them to some of the more notably bad Sonic games, and yes, the classic 2D platforms from the Genesis era do stand up quite a bit better. And I think at some point Sega realised this too. You've only got to take a look at half of Sonic Generations to see that. And so, in 2006, Sega made the conceptually intelligent decision to port the first Sonic the Hedgehog game from the Sega Genesis onto the Nintendo Game Boy Advance, which, bearing in mind that A Link to the Past and Super Mario World also went down this hugely successful path, could only bear baskets of bountiful fruit. Because no one could possibly botch this up. Oh, you sweet, naive son of a bitch. Sonic the Hedgehog Genesis is a remarkably atrocious game. Really, it's almost definitely the worst modern-ish port of a classic game you're ever gonna see. Whether or not the GBA didn't have enough blast processing to handle this game is debatable, but whatever it was resulted in spectacular and frequent drops in frame rate, a camera that is way too close so you always run into hazards that you couldn't see, and more bugs than the fucking Amazon rainforest. But the crappy frame rate is what really gets me. Having your Sonic game drop its FPS to single digits, more on that later, a game franchise that is obsessed with speed and fluid movement through a level is a goddamn war crime. It completely ruins some of the great level design present in the first Sonic game, but what makes it even worse is when a fan can do a better job than Sonic Team. In early 2007, some guy called Stealth made a ROM that recreated Sonic 1 for the GBA while still using all the original assets from the Genesis. And you know what? It's fucking glorious. It's everything that the actual commercially available, you can pay real money for this game with the Sega logo on it isn't. Says it all, really. 2006 wasn't the best year for Sonic Team. The debacle surrounding Sonic Genesis was one thing, in fact something I hadn't even heard of until about a week ago when I looked into this further, but history and indeed the line graph of quality present in Sonic games has shown that there's a pretty spectacular dip around 2006. And that's not just talking about Sonic Genesis. You see, 2006 marked the 15th anniversary of the Blue Hedgehog, and Sega wanted to celebrate this in style, and also take the opportunity to show the world what next-gen Sonic would look like. Here's the future, guys! I hope you packed enough medication for the rest of us. I almost feel bad talking about Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. I mean, it's very much common knowledge nowadays that this is one of the most poorly executed games of all time, with a barren overworld, a disjointed and occasionally deeply disturbing story, and a physics engine so broken that the finest craftsman in all of the land couldn't put it back together again. At times it feels like the sort of game you'd get if you described a Sonic game over the phone to someone and accidentally went off on a tangent about Final Fantasy. There have been humans in Sonic games before, but Sonic just looks so out of place in a lot of these scenes. Do you want me to take this seriously? Do you want me to take this seriously? Apparently there's a lot working in the background here, and Sonic 06 is a game that is clearly a few years off being in a state where it could have been released. I imagine if you were really looking forward to Sonic's 15th anniversary, then you'd be a bit pissed off by this, but if you weren't, this is a noteworthy game. Because everything is in this constant state of scarcely organised chaos, it means that the game has the tendency to go wrong in a variety of spectacular ways. It's almost worth playing to see how bad a game can be if you don't carry out the necessary bug checks and quality assurance. Certainly, if you make it to the boss fights against Silver, you're gonna learn something. Probably how to better spend your money. There's this inbuilt system of trial and error that envelops humanity and the lives we lead. When you touch something hot as a small child, you quickly learn that fire is pretty, but painful. Hitting your head on a low ceiling hurts, but you use that experience to better prepare yourself for the next time. We learn through doing, and most of the time we improve by making mistakes, by finding out what works and what falls flat on its face, what alterations need to be considered for the next time. After all, to err is human. To play the hot stove like a pair of bongo drums, that is Sega.
There is joy to be found when dealing with terrible games. You can look at the glitches and the poor optimization on display in Sonic 06 and Sonic Genesis and laugh at the variety of ways that things can go terribly wrong. It gives games like these a weird, sweaty charm to them, an unusual fun factor that is sadly missing in Sonic Boom: Rise of Lyric.
Do you remember what I said earlier about Sonic flitting between different gimmicks from one game to the next? That perhaps the inability to stick with an idea for a while and refine it further is maybe the root problem for a lot of the franchise's shortcomings? Well, no single game in the series epitomizes this notion more than Sonic Boom: Rise of Lyric for the Wii U, where gameplay elements are thrown together with no attempt made to flesh them out any further than the bare bones. The beat-em-up combat is just mashing one button with no combos, despite there being a combo meter of sorts that does absolutely nothing. The puzzles are very simple and repetitive, and the speed sections suffer from, here we go again, frame rate drops that, in conjunction with jagged camera changes, make them a vastly uncomfortable and occasionally unfair experience. And I wish this was all that was wrong with Sonic Boom, but it's not, and not by a long way. The sheer lack of focus and a panicky rush towards completion in time for the Christmas period means that nearly everything in this game is at the minimum standard for what it needs to be in order to function. At best, parts of this game aren't developed in any way. Seriously, Shadow turns up for 10 minutes, but at worst, it's an unfinished mess plagued with glitches, including the infamous knuckle jump exploit where you can skip most of the game. Sega have since patched this, which would be seen as a good move if it wasn't one of the only enjoyable parts in the game. Even the music, such a strong point of previous Sonic games, is devoid of any creativity and imagination. Fucking Sonic 06 got that right! Instead, you get to listen to the sweet, melodious tones of the four main characters not shutting the fuck up. And that's the thing really, when you're wondering how history will remember Sonic Boom, it really doesn't do anything interesting, or well. Whether or not it's because Sonic Boom got there first with the rushed, barely functional Sonic game littered with problems, but Sonic Boom is just boring. You can't really enjoy its downfall. And that is a fucking tragedy.
This has been RabbidLuigi, and what made Sonic Boom even more of a frustratingly terrible experience is that it came at a point in time when the Sonic series was just starting to pick itself up off the floor. Following Sonic 2006, the franchise had started to find its feet again and get an identity out of itself. But then this game came along and made itself the new low point in the series. You know you fucked up a game when Sonic 06 looks like a more inviting prospect.
Hello everybody, thanks for watching. This video marks the end of the voted top 5s for this year. I'm actually using the last 2 weeks of the year to talk about the best and worst games released in 2015, and I'm just wondering if you'd like them continued into 2016. I like the idea of giving you lot some kind of contribution for these videos, and hundreds of minds tend to be better than one. Be sure to let me know via a comment below or these social things I have, Facer and Tweetbook or something, I can't remember.